FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and it's August 7th, 2017. Hard to believe. I mean, the year is just rolling by, but I guess you get to a certain point, and they all do, which is why you really need to start thinking about your retirement, thinking about ways to bring in passive income or investment income. There's so many reasons to do it. We're talking better tax consequences, better tax treatment. We're talking about the ability to build wealth and generational wealth and pass it along. And with us is Keith Weinhold. And Keith, you're contributing writer to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Advisors blog, and you just came out with your own book, 7 Money Myths That Are Killing Your Wealth Potential. You're a real estate investor. You've been doing it for 15 years. You run GetRichEducation.com, as well as posting a very popular podcast of the same name. And Keith, welcome to the Financial Survival Network. And before we get into it, if you've got any questions for Keith or myself, email me at kl@kerrylutz.com. Keith, welcome to the show.
Good day, Kerry. Thank you for having me.
Hey, well, it's always great to have somebody on who doesn't just talk the talk, but actually walks the walk. You've been doing real estate for 15 years now. So 2 issues that we talked about pre-call. Number 1 is, how do you start in real estate investing with a bang, using almost none of your own money? I mean, I think everybody wants to know the answer to that question.
Well, that's a great question. And, fortunately, the answer is something that's still very actionable for your audience. You can still start out the same way that I started out. When I was kind of coming of age, when I had a job for a couple years, I had some liquidity saved up, and it was about time for me to buy my first home. Rather than buying a single family home or condo, what I did is I purchased a 4-plex building where I lived in 1 unit and rented out the other 3. And one has the ability to do that still today with the same loan program, an FHA loan, Federal Housing Administration loan program. It's a program to promote home ownership in the United States. And with just that 3.5% down payment that you need to get into that situation, Kerry, that 3.5% down payment can even be in the form of a gift. That's okay with FHA if your family has some money and you don't even have the savings or the liquidity ball to get started. So with just a 3.5% down payment, a minimum FICO score of only 580 at last check, and the requirement that you live in one of the 4 units for at least 12 months, you can get in that way. And you can do that with either a single family home, a duplex, triplex, or a 4-plex. But a 4-plex, that really maximizes your economies of scale. Yeah. So it's a great way to start. Now, it's not always easy. You learn lessons about being a landlord in the owned building where you live. For example, I did some dumb things when I started off being an owner occupant of that 4-plex, like, for example, renting a vacant unit right next to me to girls just because they were attractive. Well, I soon learned that being attractive is not the best criterion in making a great tenant.
No, that sounds like a major, major mistake. And I guess you didn't make that one again, did you?
No, I didn't make that one again. I actually did some things like employment searches and criminal background checks and, sound things that actually make some sense. So, with the 4-plex building, it is really a great way to start and get all the leverage and tax advantages on an entire building. And I know this idea might excite some of your listeners if they haven't heard it before, but a few things to be careful for is, you want to go buy a 4-plex in an area with job growth, okay? Because that's where your income comes from, in an area with job growth. And it usually works best, this is just really general, but in inland markets, not in coastal markets. And finally, it sort of works best if you're able to get what we call a 1% rent to value ratio on the property. So if you purchase a $300,000 4-plex, you would want all 4 units to total a rent income of about $3,000 or so. And that's where really the numbers begin to work. And you can be in a positive cash flowing situation after year 1, after you move out. Because when you move out, now you have 4 rent incomes rather than 3. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So if you need $3,000, does that mean each unit's going for $1,000 a month, or is that $750 included after you move out? Yeah, I would say 750. If each unit gets close to 750, yeah, it would be that 1% after you move out. So after you move out, besides getting 4 rent incomes rather than 3, see, now you're able to qualify for a better home than you ever could have had you just started out with wanting to buy a single family home, because now you can use a portion of the tenant's rent income from the fourplex that you're vacating. You can use a portion of that rent income toward your qualification. So now you're in a better home than what you could have lived in if you had started off on a single family home, and you own 2 assets and you have an income stream.
Wow, pretty cool. And I guess anybody can do this. Do you have to pay mortgage insurance on this, or how's that work?
That's a great question. You do have to pay mortgage insurance on that, and that's a few $100s a month. And for those that don't know, mortgage insurance, that's basically an annoying additional expense to you of a few $100s a month, where you need to pay a premium to the bank, basically to protect the bank in case you default. So that's why it's so annoying. You don't really get any benefit from it. You're helping protect the bank when you pay mortgage insurance. So typically with anything less than a 20% down payment, with FHA is with that 3.5% down, yes, smart question. That's one of your expenses, mortgage insurance.
And it's funny because there's a lot of costs like that do you, the owner, no good, like title insurance. I didn't want to kind of diverge into this, but title insurance is another thing that, look, yeah, if there's a judgment out there or something against you or former owner, it could come back to bite you. But usually you're doing it again for the bank's protection, right?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, there are advantages to that, though. Yes, we do have these things that we have to pay to the bank, but the bank, that's what provides us with leverage. And as you'll see as we talk in a couple minutes, the leverage that the bank creates for you, that enables you to use other people's money, which contributes to a fantastic rate of return, which really makes real estate the best wealth creator from ordinary people to wealthy than any other vehicle that's possibly out there.
So you bought one, you want to be buying more, right?
Yeah. And you know what, Kerry? I achieved financial freedom about 12 years after I bought that fourplex, and I really didn't add much more of my own money to the equation. So just over time, with doing cash out refinances and with doing 1031 tax deferred exchanges, basically I just traded up, sometimes having to add some more of my own money, but generally just trading up, understanding how the numbers work and doing things that way, and only being my own landlord for the first few years of doing this. It's so important to outsource that to somebody else as you go over time and build your portfolio, because that's how you can make it scalable. I mean, how many units could I really own if I tried to manage them myself? I really don't want to do that. So at some point, when you get big enough, you really want to invest in relationships and finding a good communicative property manager that others refer you to go ahead and take care of this for you, because this is investing. We're talking about investing here. You don't want to add another job onto your plate.
That's for sure. So, hey, and if you happen to be a realtor on that FHA deal, you might get your entire commission back and wind up not having to put anything down on it, right?
That's a really smart point. Yeah, that's right. That down payment is low enough so that you could have virtually zero skin in the game. So that FHA loan, that is available to virtually anybody. However, unless there are extenuating circumstances, you can typically not have more than one FHA loan at a time. That's something to keep in mind. So you want to use your one FHA loan spot on a property that really counts.
Right. Yeah. So all these ways. So after you buy the first one, and what's your next play? Because you've kind of maxed out your FHA borrowing capability, right? So you got to have a plan to move on from there, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually lived in that first fourplex for 3 years. I really wasn't like that into real estate. I didn't really understand the power of it yet. So 3 years after buying that fourplex, I moved out into a single family home just to increase my quality of life. And again, now I could use those 4 rent incomes to qualify for a better single family home. But what I did, and this is back around 2006, 2007, Kerry, when we had a significant run up in equity, is I took equity from this first fourplex building for $295,000 that I told you about. That had run up to a value of $425,000, and I basically took equity out of the first fourplex and used that as a 10% down payment on a second fourplex that I never occupied. Now, that act right there, that would give some people pause. They would say, well, wait a second, you're taking on more debt than you've ever taken on. But yes, I bought it so that every dime of that debt is safely outsourced to others. So my income on a monthly basis exceeds the expenses on both properties. And now I just transferred equity from one property into a second property. When one transfers equity, no equity was lost. It was merely only transferred. And now I'm leveraging 2 properties and I have 8 rent incomes rather than just 4.
Right. And then wash and repeat, basically, right?
Yeah, then wash and repeat. Now, a 10% down program, non-owner occupied like that doesn't fly these days. That would be almost impossible to find. But so it was really about this time, Carrie, when I'm beginning to understand that real estate investors are paid 5 ways simultaneously. And most longtime real estate investors don't even understand this fact, that they're paid 5 ways simultaneously.
And what are those 5 ways?
Well, those 5 ways are appreciation, cash flow, principal pay down made by tenants. 4thly is tax advantages. And 5thly is probably the least understood one. It's inflation hedging. So I can go through these 5. We can look at the rates of return from each one of the 5 and then add those 5 up and come up with the total rate of return. And this total rate of return number is going to be pretty high. And when you hear this total rate of return number I come up with, some people are just going to think, oh, that seems impossible. If you come from the consumer credit world where you're used to investing in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, it's almost going to sound irresponsible, but it's not. So, I'm just going to have to ask the listener to bear with me as we get into these 5, because there's a few numbers that are flying around here, but this is exactly what makes real estate the greatest wealth creation vehicle ever. So what one would do is, for example, they purchase a $100,000 income property, a single family home, and you can find good rehabilitated ones in the Midwest and South. This is what I do now. I travel around and find the best investor markets around the United States. Is with the first way you're paid of 5, appreciation. Well, with that $100,000 property, real estate only appreciates about 6% per year nationally and historically. So you've put a $20,000 down payment into this $100,000 property. That's how much you need to put down on a property that you don't plan to occupy. Well, that $100,000 property only appreciates to $106,000 after year 1 in this example. Well, that's 6%. That's not very thrilling. So what? But the exciting part is that we just talked about how you only put $20K of skin in the game. Well, I just said you got a $6,000 return. Well, a $6,000 return divided by a $20,000 investment, that is a 30% rate of return on your down payment. And some people say, well, wait, how in the heck did that happen? How could you do that? That's because you got a 6% return on both your $20,000 down payment and the $80,000 that you borrowed from the bank. That's what's known as financial leverage. So the return on the $80,000 loan from the bank, that money is yours, not the bank's. And that's leverage. And that's how you have a 30% rate of return just from the first of 5 ways that you're paid.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable. And there's more.
And there's more. So you have 30% from the appreciation. The second way you're paid is cash flow, and that's on a monthly basis, your tenant rent income minus your expenses. So we're just going to be conservative. We'll just say you get $150 of monthly cash flow from this income single family home. So $150 per month, that's $1,800 per year from your tenant rent income minus all expenses. So $1,800 a year divided by your $20K of skin in the game in year 1, that's another 9% return on top of your 30%. And by the way, that 9% return from your cash flow, that's what's known as the cash on cash return portion. Right. So the third way that real estate investors are paid is through principal pay down. Now, you might think that that's unusual to go ahead and add to your rate of return because in your own home, you have principal pay down. If you own a primary residence, you're paying down the principal, but see, you're having to work to pay down the principal. The tenant pays down the principal each month for you when you have an income property where your income exceeds your expenses. So typically, that's about another 5% rate of return per year when you look at the principal portion paid down per year divided by your $20K of skin in the game. So now we've got 30% from appreciation, 9 from cash flow, and 5 from principal pay down. That's the third of 5 ways that you're paid.
Wow, pretty good.
Yeah. Fourthly are the tax advantages. Now, this one gets a little bit tricky because it all depends on your situation and your income and your deductions. But real estate investors get terrific tax advantages, and they get them at scale with the more properties that they buy. They get tax advantages like something called depreciation, where you don't even need to incur an expense to get a write-off. So the short story on tax depreciation is you don't even need to pay tax on all of your cash flow. A portion of your cash flow is completely tax deductible. And you also get some other great advantages, like I have never paid capital gains tax on my real estate legally because I do 1031 exchanges. So let's just say tax advantages are another 2% tailwind per annum to you, which is pretty conservative. And then the fifth and final way that you're paid is one that very few real estate investors and even most real estate investing educators don't understand. And that's called an inflation hedging benefit. And you know what, Kerry, this is actually the reason right here why Robert Kiyosaki famously says, savers are losers, debtors are winners. Yeah. And it's a pretty inflammatory statement, but the reason savers are losers and debtors are winners is when you take out an $80,000 loan on this property, inflation erodes the weight of that $80,000 over time. So that when you go to pay it back years later, well, by that time, typically prices are higher, wages are higher, incomes are higher, and it's easier to pay back that $80,000 in debt. So that way, you're able to hedge yourself against inflation. Look, just like you wouldn't want to put $1 million in the bank and keep it sitting there for years and years because you know inflation erodes that purchasing power, you do want to try to take out $1 million in debt because inflation also erodes the weight of that debt over time. So what that comes down to with your $80,000 loan on your income property, that's a $430 monthly payment, principal and interest. Well, that payment stays fixed. That payment stays the same over time. So 5 years later, you'll still just have a $430 principal and interest payment on this income property, and it gets easier to pay back. Inflation makes the value of the dollar eventually go to zero, but inflation eventually makes the weight of your debt go to zero just the same. Mm-hmm. So at a 5% inflation rate, which, I think we all know the CPI is understated, the 2% or so target. The CPI is understated for so many reasons. A lot of economists would tell you that the real rate of inflation, the real diminished purchasing power of the dollar is more than 5%. But if we just call inflation 5%, let's add up our 5 ways that we're paid. 30% from appreciation, another 9% from cash flow, another 5 from principal pay down, just 2 from tax advantages, 5 from inflation hedging. That comes out to a 51% total rate of return. And there's room there. You could have several things go wrong. And, even if you only got a 35% total rate of return, you are handily beating most professional investors because you understand the 5 ways that you're paid in real estate investing.
And let's talk about depreciation. So you have to be a real estate professional to take advantage of depreciation over a certain point to write it off on your taxes.
Well, that's one where you actually don't need to have a real estate professional designation in order to get the tax depreciation rate off each year. In fact, just talking with Rich Dad advisor Tom Wheelwright, he made me aware of something, and it's you actually have to claim tax depreciation each year. You actually have to claim that right off. There are some other advantages with a designation you're bringing up called real estate professional that go above and beyond that. But to get the depreciation, you don't need any special designation there for that one, actually.
You don't. Okay. So all's good. So what's the downside here, Keith? If you had to pick a downside to it, you've had ups and downs. You make mistakes. That's how you learn. What's the biggest mistake that you made?
I think the biggest mistake I've made so far in real estate is over-investing in my local market. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, okay? Here in Anchorage, Alaska, it's a city of 300,000 people, but I got over-invested here. Now, thankfully, about 5 years ago, I began investing out of state, or I'd really have some problems. But I have local apartment buildings, Kerry, that used to provide me with several $1,000s of monthly cash flow, and they are now cash flow zero, even a little bit cash flow negative, because this local economy is so dependent on the price of a barrel of oil. Yeah. And I think we both know what's happened to the price of a barrel of oil over the last 3 years. So a lot of job layoffs have been announced, and a lot of families have left the state, and there are just fewer dollars circulating in this economy. So this is a little bit incomprehensible to people that live in the other 49 states. Yeah. But my rent income, the rent income I'm allowed to ask, is 15% lower than it was 2 years ago, and it's really starting to hurt. So, that's a mistake I made early on. I should have gotten diversified into several markets across the United States because I do have good relationships with property managers in many markets, and I should have diversified myself economically because the market that you're in is actually more important than the property itself. It doesn't matter how good the property is. If there aren't good rent-paying tenants in it, it's no longer income property if it doesn't produce income.
That's right. And I guess there's other markets similar to Anchorage, like Houston, I know took a hit, although it's a bit more diversified than the Alaskan economy. But still, it definitely put a hurt on the local economy, at least for a while, till the oil slump kind of righted itself. Even though prices are still low, they're out there drilling more and more rigs. So employment, North Dakota is another one like that, right?
Those are two really smart examples that you just gave there. Yeah, it hurt Houston somewhat, but you're right. They're better diversified than a lot of those North Dakota markets dependent upon the fracking, or Anchorage, Alaska here, where we're just so dependent on the price of a barrel of oil and almost no manufacturing takes place. And there's not a very large economy outside of oil here. So you got to consider the market before the property. But most real estate investors just think, oh, where can I find a good property or where can I find a nice property? That really doesn't start there. It starts with what's a vibrant market and how good is your team, especially your property manager in that market.
Yeah, exactly. So you're in Alaska and you have no problem investing in real estate in the lower 48, right?
Yeah, that's right. It comes to trusting a team. You know, I go to a lot of real estate investing events, both nationally and internationally. And, you know, there's just no better way to get connected with a good team than to talk to a fellow investor and say, hey, how have your Memphis properties worked for you? How have your Birmingham, Alabama properties worked for you? Is your manager communicated with you? Does it actually produce cash flow? Is it a good property? Are you able to keep it occupied? You know, we live in a digital world and I do a lot of things remotely.
Yeah, you're right. We do live in a digital world and you're able to do much more, you know, with much less than you could ever do before.
That's right. And, you know, that's one reason why geography means less than it ever has to business and to real estate investing. But geography is still immensely important. I mean, come on, this is real estate, location, location, location. So it means less than it ever had, but it still matters, especially in real estate.
Yeah, of course. It's always going to matter. It's like you say, location and diversification makes so much sense, Keith, and you've experienced it firsthand. And I know all of you out there are going to want to find out more about this, going to want to get involved. So, Keith, the best place to find you of all of your numerous locations, I know you're on the Rich Dad Advisors blog. Is it getricheducation.com?
Yeah, it's the Get Rich Education podcast and getricheducation.com.
All right, excellent. And if you got a question for Keith or myself, email us at kl@kerrylutz.com, tweet us at Kerry Lutz, and the Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. Keith, it's been a lot of fun. We're definitely going to have you on again. And hey, keep on investing.
Thanks so much, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.